All right, it is now 3 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to the communications portion of the de-escalation training that the Wichita Law Enforcement Training Center is going to provide today. The defensive tactics instructors, who will introduce themselves as we go along this presentation, will be speaking for the next 30 minutes to introduce the topic, and then open for question answers for about 90 minutes after that. My name is Captain Lim Moore. I'm the commander of the Wichita Law Enforcement Training Center out on the WSU campus. A few housekeeping things I'd like to go over real quick. While here in the Teams meeting, we ask that you all keep your video muted while we are going through this, so that the PowerPoint's able to be on the full screen as it's being presented. But now, and after the PowerPoint's finished, when we move into the question and answer session, at that point in time, you can start video sharing your screen again, so that way our staff's able to see who they're talking to, and you all can actually create that network that needs to be created. For those that are just joining and didn't get to attend on Monday, this presentation was put on or created to assist Wichita employees in dealing with uncomfortable or aggressive situations when encountering citizens as they're doing their daily job, whether it's in an office environment, the call center, or whether it's out in the field. But this is a general communications training that we're going to go through, and to hopefully be able to answer a lot of your questions and get more in depth in what you all are needing. At this point in time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand this training over to Officer Eric Petrowski, and he'll start out the presentation.
Thank you, Captain Moore. I'm Officer Eric Petrowski of the Wichita Police Department, and I'm a full-time instructor at the Wichita Sedgwick County Law Enforcement Training Center. This afternoon, we're going to talk about communication and de-escalation. This is the second part in our two-part series. On Monday, if you remember, those of you that did watch, we talked a little bit about verbal communication and verbal nonverbal cues and situational awareness. I apologize. So we're going to start the PowerPoint, and then at the end, we'll have questions and answers. I have two other members of staff at the Academy who do the exact same job that I do that'll be more than happy to assist with the question and answer session. So just as a follow-up, this is a little overview of what we talked about on Monday, if you haven't watched it yet, but we're obviously going to try to keep ourselves and the citizens safe at all times. While we're out there, either in the field or in our workplace, we want to make sure we keep our head up, looking around, be wary of distractions, especially from our cell phones or electronic devices such as tablets or laptops. Be aware of our surroundings. We should be looking around constantly, scanning. Try to maintain eye contact with people we're having a conversation with. Keep our eyes open, ears open. Try to keep our hands free as best we can. When we are dealing with someone, keep obviously our cell phones in our pockets unless we need to be using them. Try to stand straight up and display that confidence. That really gives someone a feeling that you know what you're doing, and it adds to your credibility. We talked a little bit about reactionary gap in personal space. We like to keep that 6-foot reactionary gap from someone, which allows us to have a little more space to react. So always try to get more distance if you need to. Obviously, if someone you're in their personal space, it's going to cause a lot of people a little bit of anxiety and may cause them to act out a little bit more. So some of our terminology, what does de-escalation mean? And this is where it's really nice to have a audience where they can give feedback, but think about what it means to you. Does it mean calm? Maybe not necessarily, but does de-escalation or de-escalation training imply that you can de-escalate someone? What do you guys think? Kind of think of it in your own mind. I'm going to tell you guys, there are times where there's nothing you really can say or do that's going to be 100% effective all the time. I'm going to give you some tools to use. But even in our line of work, when we're dealing with difficult people, there are just times when we cannot come to a resolution, and it just kind of is what it is. So we'll move on to some conflict crisis resolution skills. Obviously, we're going to assure our own safety at all times and the safety of the people that we're engaging. If you can, try to manage your anxiety or nerves. If you're dealing with someone who's difficult and you're anxious or nervous about it, you're not going to come off as being as professional as what you need to do. So try to manage that as best you can. Good way to do that, if you're feeling nervous or anxious, Take some deep breaths. If you don't already know what either box breathing is, there's some breathing exercises you can do to help yourself relax a little bit too. Try to have effective interpersonal communication skills. That's done through practice. And the best way to do that is just talk to people. Scenario-based training is also good. If you're able to do that and go to some kind of scenario-based training and do some communications drills, that's great. We'd like to always try to establish rapport with people, and that can be as simple as trying to talk to them on their level, find something that you have in common, and connect with them on their level as well. Also, if we can, we'd like to allow them to solve their own problem if the situation warrants. That gives them a little ownership, a little buy-in to that. If they think they've solved their own problem, then that's a win for both of us. And then we obviously want to try to provide a solution to whatever's going on. Next question we're going to ask is, can you make someone calm down? I'm going to just kind of have you think about this for a second or two. Decide what you think it's a yes or no answer. And obviously, a lot of times, it's not as simple as that. So the answer really is yes and no. You can make someone calm down, but not always. So we're going to talk about that a little more in detail. Most of the time, you're not going to make someone calm down. The worst thing you can tell someone if they're in a state of distress or anxiety is, sir or ma'am, calm down. Okay, that never works. That's never really good. We're going to try to create an environment that's going to allow them to calm down on their own. So if we can do that, that'll be good for both of us. Be aware it may not always work, and it may take more time with some people than it does with others, depending on the level of stress or anxiety or what's going on or what kind of problem we're experiencing. So just keep in mind how upset they are may dictate how long it takes for someone to calm down in a situation. So how can you let someone, not make them, how can you let someone calm down? We're going to use our active listening skills, allow verbal venting. Yes, it is okay to let the person vent and blow off steam per se, if it's safe to do so. A lot of times, from personal experience, you know that if you are allowed to vent a little bit, say what's on your mind, you feel better afterwards, and then that allows you to kind of calm down on your own as well. Nonverbal mirroring, an example of that would be if someone is saying something positive, you give a head nod, okay, yeah, it looks like, I agree with you. If they're saying something negative, we can, shake our head or facial expressions, things like that. That helps allow that situation for someone to calm down. Give them time and space, time especially, time to calm down, and definitely give them distance. We talked about giving distance, maybe give them a little more space than what they need, especially if they're pacing around. People generally tend to pace. It helps them get some energy out and helps them calm down a little bit. Treat them with respect. We should be doing this regardless, but in a situation that's volatile, we want to definitely treat someone with the utmost respect. If we model a calm demeanor ourselves, that's going to create an environment for them to calm down as well. If we're agitated and we're in their face and we're exchanging words with them, that's not going to provide a good situation for them to calm down. We need to be calm. Our voice needs to be calm. Our demeanor needs to be calm. And what we say is very important. And try to encourage breathing. Instead of telling someone to calm down, obviously tell them, hey, sir, just take a deep breath. Just relax, take a deep breath or two. A lot of times getting a little oxygen on board helps reduce our heart rate, get that blood pressure down a little bit, and helps generate an environment, again, that helps let someone calm down a little bit. So we're going to talk about 5 universal truths. If you haven't heard of these, Dr. George Thompson is a very famous person in the psychological world. He came up with these. So all people want to be treated with dignity and respect. This goes for everybody from somebody who is very wealthy and affluent to somebody who's homeless on the street or very poor that doesn't have much. It's just a basic universal truth. People want to be treated with that dignity and respect. They want to be asked rather than told. I find that people, especially small children, get a lot more done if they ask them to do things like a chore versus just telling them. People just really don't like to be told what to do as a general rule. They want to be told why they're asked to be doing something, and that's okay to tell them why. Well, sir or ma'am, I'd like you to do this. Well, why? Because we're kind of why people anyway, even if we don't admit to it. We all like to know why we're being asked to do something or why we should do something, and if we can provide that person with a reasonable answer they can understand, that may help us get to our goal or solution. All people want to be given options rather than threats. Really, nobody really wants to be threatened. But if we can give them some options, hey, sir, if you do this, then this will happen. If you do this, then this will happen, et cetera. That's a lot better than threatening to, say, for example, take their kids away, shut their water off, things like that we're dealing with. And again, all people want to be given a second chance. People make mistakes, and they screw up from time to time. They like to be given a second chance, and if we can provide that through the course of our duties, that's going to help us be successful. We'll move on next to 4 questions everyone has. These are something when you're dealing with someone, they may want to know. Why are you here? Who are you? Where do you get your authority? And what's in it for me? Why you're here can be as simple as I'm out here doing an inspection, or I'm out here to check a meter, something like that. Who are you? It's okay to introduce yourself. We'll talk about universal greeting next and what to say. Very simple as I'm, so-and-so with City of Wichita, department, et cetera. Where you get your authority may be as simple as I work for the water department, I work for the sewer department, I work for the fire department. You may have a uniform to go along with that. That's always good, or at least a name badge or ID badge or something like that. I know a lot of departments have uniforms they're wearing. At the very least, they have an ID. Then what's in it for me? They want to know what they are going to benefit from you being there, you interacting with them. Or is there a benefit? Or is there a negative, possibly? So the greeting is going to set the tone of communication. If we can start out with a good universal greeting and practice this, it's going to set the tone for the stage and everything. If we just come off and say, hey, I'm here to do this, that's not going to be as good as if we can just soften a little bit. So give them a nice greeting with a hello, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time of day is just fine. My name is whatever your name is, and I'm with whatever department or agency you're with. I'm here today because, and then explain to them in detail what you're there to do, and then what you want them to, what you're going to talk to them about. I'm here to ask you about this. I'm here to talk to you about this, whatever may be in context with what type of interaction you're having. So we need to be practicing good self-discipline as well. It's almost impossible to have good interpersonal communication skills if your heart rate is racing, if you're emotional, if you're have a lot of anxiety. Keep in mind that we understand that everybody has a bad day from time to time. Don't let your bad day ruin someone else's bad day because you're not feeling it. So sometimes we have to remain calm even when we're not calm and try to model that calmness that we expect from them. Let's try to have a plan if we can before we approach a situation. Let's think about what we're going to say. Let's also think about what we're going to do. If someone reacts negatively, let's have a plan in place to be able to counter that negative reaction before we're caught blindsided a little bit. Again, as we talk about being calm and concerned, sometimes you're not going to feel calm, or you may not genuinely feel concerned. It's okay to be a little bit of an actor. It's okay if you're having a bad day to put on your game face, go to work, be professional, smile. You're going to have to do that from time to time. Let's listen with our ears. A lot of times it's really hard to listen when we're talking, especially if we're talking over someone. So let's pay attention to what the person's say, what they're saying to us. Try to get the information that we can. What helps me a lot is I'd like to write things down, so if you can take notes, that's not a bad idea either. And remember, again, like we said, they may need to vent their frustrations. It's okay to let them vent a little bit as long as our safety is not in jeopardy, as long as we're maintaining distance. Let them vent their frustrations, and we'll talk about what to say on the verbals on that. Listen with your body. Obviously, your body language should be good, and you should be paying attention to their body language and their facial expressions. We talked about some nonverbal cues Monday in that module, and if you need to go back and look at those, feel free to do so, please. Let's try to express concern and attention by making eye contact. People, if you don't make eye contact with them and you're talking to them, they don't think that you're paying attention to them, or if you're listening to them and you're not making eye contact, they don't really think you're listening. So let's really try to do a good job with making good direct eye contact with them. Keep our arms uncrossed. Try to maintain a little bit of a neutral expression as well. Crossing your arms obviously shows that you're closed off and you're probably not going to be listening to that person. Obviously don't roll your eyes, things like that. So to motivate or persuade someone to get them to do what we would like them to do, we're obviously going to listen first. We're going to empathize, try to empathize with the person. Maybe you've been in a similar situation that you can relate to them with. Paraphrase what they've told you. I understand what you're saying, so what you're telling me is this, this, and this. Ask them to do whatever it is you would like them to do in a nice, calm voice. Summarize what you have done or what you would like to do. Know what your goals are and try to promote those goals, whatever they are, with whatever situation you're dealing with. Okay, some verbal de-escalation strategies we'll talk about next. Whenever we're dealing with the person, especially if they're frustrated, angry, let's acknowledge their feelings and let them know they're being heard. Something very simple to say is, I hear you're frustrated, that blank. I know you're frustrated, I hear you're frustrated. That tells that you're listening to them and that you're understanding what they are telling you. Say what you can do right now. You may be able to offer several solutions, or you might need to talk to a supervisor, coworker, or a boss to get more help. Don't make promises that you can't keep also. Keep that in mind. Don't tell them that you are going to do something and then not do it or follow up with that. Again, sometimes you're not always going to be able to solve the situation at the time. It's always good to say, if you can't solve it, I'll get the answer. I'll get someone that can take care of this. I'll get my supervisor to call you back by this time, this date. Obviously, give them a phone number. They can be in contact with your agency or your department if they have any other questions as well. So again, some other deep verbal deflection strategies. I understand what you're saying. However, I have a job to do, and this is what I need to do. I appreciate that. However, I hear that. I'm listening, which is really good because you're verbally telling them that you're listening along with your body language. I can see that you're upset, and that's unfortunate. However, I still have a job to do. I still need to do this. I have a function to perform. It seems that way, and I agree it's difficult. However, that shows a little empathy with what we're saying, shows that we're listening to what they're telling us. Another good thing to keep in mind is don't debate while you're trying to de-escalate. It's not really good to debate with someone, and you're not really going to win out there. Again, it's best for one person to talk at a time. Please try not to get in an argument. You're not going to win arguments with people out there because they're going to get louder and get more agitated. Try not to interrupt. It's kind of a human nature for us to want to interrupt when we have something to say. Try to be mindful that they're talking and we don't like to be interrupted as well. So let's give them the courtesy with not interrupting them when they're trying to speak. Let them get it off their chest, let them say that, then we can go back and say what we need to say. Consider saying something like, what can I do to help? That's great. Would you assist me in blank? That gives them a little buy-in. That lets them feel like they're actually helping you with whatever it is. Can you work with me? And obviously remember to call someone by sir or ma'am. That shows respect. We should be treating people with respect like we talked about. That shows a level of respect regardless of income level or anything else. And please keep in mind, it's okay to say please and thank you. See, I just said please to prompt that sentence. So please and thank you go a long way. Can you please do this for me? Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that. That goes a long way with people in general, and it works really well. Some do's and don'ts with active listening. We are going to try to maintain eye contact like we talked about. Limit your talking. Try to let them talk a little bit more. If you need to say something, that's fine. Wait till you get that pause in there. Don't talk over them. Try to manage your emotions. Everyone has, I'm going to say, buttons that get pushed from time to time. We're all professionals, and we should be able to manage our emotions. Take a deep breath. That'll help. Ask good, pertinent questions. Use empathy. And try to validate what it is they're saying. Again, we talk about don'ts. Don't interrupt or debate. Don't jump to conclusions. Please don't show signs of impatience. I know we all have jobs to do, and there's all kinds of other jobs we can be doing, but when we're dealing with the situation at the hand, let's try to show as much patience as we can. Please don't judge or be judgmental towards people. We're not in their shoes, and we don't know what situation it is that they're in. We don't know the whole story. Do not argue like we talked about. Don't become defensive, and try not to project your own values and ethics on someone. That doesn't always work well. That's going to end the PowerPoint presentation of this. Move on to the questions. I'm going to attempt to put this on the screen and see if we can switch the camera, and we'll have our panel show up here. And Tyler, there we go. Okay, I'm going to move over to the chair, and you guys are more than happy to answer questions or ask questions, and we'll try to get those answered as best as possible. And we'll kind of go the same format that we did last time. I have Officer Jabara, who's up here from the Law Enforcement Training Center as well. She's an instructor up there. And Officer Nixon's on the end of the white shirt. He's an instructor up there as well at the Law Enforcement Training Center. We'll take a first question, just like we did last time. I think we had the fire department go first. Is there anybody from the fire department that has a question? And if not, that's okay. We'll move on to the city manager's office. And we're not getting anyone buzzing in from there, so we'll move on to Public Works. Okay, and we'll move on to the housing. Is there anyone from housing that has any questions about what we have presented today? Okay, we'll move on to the library. If there's anybody from the library that has any questions? And, somebody. I think Sarah McNeil's got her hand up.
Hi, I do have a question. So these are some really great tips for dealing with the public. What kind of suggestions would you give for dealing with folks that have mental illnesses? Because a lot of our patrons that we often have issues with are also suffering from mental illness. And so could you give us any extra tidbits dealing with that type of population?
You want me to start?
Please.
When we're dealing with, again, my name's Chris Nixon. I'm an instructor at the training center. Dealing with mentals is very complex. And depending on what you're doing with that individual, kind of will dictate what I'm going to do. Most mentals don't like their space invaded, so keeping distance, giving them that space to move about, obviously doing it safety. It's a lot easier if you had details of what you might have seen out in the field or some of the employees that may have dealt with certain situations to give you, because there's so many avenues I can go down based on that subject I'm dealing with specifically. But usually creating distance, giving them time or space to move about, not crowding them. We got to slow things down. Patience is probably the big thing with mentals. And then working in smaller steps than you would do with a standard person. Do you have something more specific of an incident may have occurred that we can maybe address and get into more detail potentially?
No, not necessarily. It's just, at the library, we have a certain policy for our customers. And that's not to say that we have more combative issues with folks with mental illness, but sometimes it's more regular. And we do notate, our customers' accounts when we have issues, but we don't always have those accounts open when we're having a confrontation. So I guess I was just looking for more on the spot,
Yeah,
tips.
do you know their names?
If they're a regular, we might know their names if we get into their accounts, but again, we might not be at a service point where we're looking at their accounts. And we have so many different departments within our department that some people might not be having the same interactions with those folks. So I would say we're more comfortable knowing people by face than name, unless we're actually making those notes ourselves or checking materials out to them.
Okay. So dealing with mentals, the biggest thing is the space. Give them their space. Be patient with them. If there's something in particular that's causing concern you need to address with them, or if it's somebody you see frequently, I would address them every time you see them. That way they always, they think you know who they are. That usually will keep any contacts from becoming more volatile later. That's definitely a complex field, and Without a lot of specifics, I'm just going to tell you distance and not touching them. Mentals do not like to be touched usually. If it's obviously escalated to a situation you can't control verbally, obviously we have other resources and CIT officers that could always come and help navigate that for you. But again, looking for those verbal and nonverbal cues, and just giving them space is probably going to be your biggest and safest bet.
And he mentioned slowing down, so you're going to go into those smaller steps like we talked about, but also for you, when you're talking to them, slow even how you're speaking, your cadence down so that they have more time to process it, depending on what their mental deficiencies are. That should help you a little bit too. And he mentioned learning if you have their names and you know it, the more you can use that, not just for mental health, but anyone else as you're talking to them. Using their name personalizes it a little bit more, and it makes them feel like you're listening a bit more to them, the fact that you're remembering their name. So yes, with mental health, but even with our average person out there that you're talking to and your customers, when you're using their name, if you could put that into different times, that will help you out too.
Also, Sarah, I'd like to add to that, if you think the person is in crisis and there's a safety concern, please don't hesitate to use 911, and we'll get a trained officer out there to help assist with that issue too. Okay, we'll move on to the next, I want to say caller, but it's not really, I don't have a talk show. So Eva, Claudio?
Hi, yes, thank you. I think I can speak a little bit to what Sarah was saying with an example. The library kind of has two behaviors that we address. There's a bunch of unacceptable behaviors, which are just minor disruptions to the function of the library. And then there's serious offenses. And I think one thing we had, I think it was last December, a customer interaction began as a unacceptable behavior, playing his audio equipment too loud so everybody could hear it. And when we approached him with the idea of giving him the customer's guide to behavior, and there's kind of with unacceptable behavior, there's kind of 3 strikes and you're out, is kind of the older training we've been given. But then he quickly got angry and he actually physically threatened to harm our manager and might have started a fire outside the library.
Okay.
So I think just, and maybe the library needs to revise kind of the 3 strikes and you're out, because there have been times, other examples where it did escalate quickly, and then when we did call the police for help, the individual was really questioned about that decision because they weren't at our building. We don't have security at the branch libraries.
Right. So was this an individual that you've had contact with before?
We did not recognize him. He did have notes on his card from interactions at the main library downtown. And it did say, like, he should be banned the next time he is disruptive, but it wasn't clear what his behavior was. And we didn't have time to see that until kind of after everything that had happened.
Okay, and so based on what I'm hearing, obviously this person was a problem. He's probably someone that you're not going to de-escalate or get to a point where he's going to communicate with you effectively and maybe listen. This is probably an individual where you need to just call 911, have an officer come and trespass that individual from arriving back on any of that property. And then ultimately, if he did, he would be subject to arrest. I don't know your policies when it comes to that. But again, that's probably one of those persons, especially if he's always disruptive. And with, like I said, with mental health, there's never 100% go-to technique with them because it can change from day to day. I've dealt with mentals that are very calm one day and the next day they're trying to hurt us. So that's very difficult. But again, using these tools that we've talked about, and I apologize if I keep looking at the screen because this is where I see your faces, so I apologize. I'll try to look forward. But using these skills and knowing when it's a threat and not a threat, and not even engaging them is probably going to be your best bet, and then you can have law enforcement come in and remove that person for you rather than you risking the chance of being assaulted. I hope that helps.
It does help. I think the library might need to evaluate, like, do we have to do the 3 steps? Like, you get a warning and then you're banned for a day before
Yeah, and like I said,
the seriousness.
yeah, and not knowing your policies or what you've done in the past, do you have mandated reporting on subjects like this with law enforcement? A lot of times we can mitigate continued issues if we start trespassing these individuals that are going to be out of control. There's no way of de-escalating, like I said, some portion of the population, so you just have to cut your losses and sometimes go the hard route by getting law enforcement involved and trespassing them, and hopefully that'll help mitigate those issues.
And it did help. The security guard at the main library was aware of his behavior. I think it's something that happened at a county building, and so then administration realized that it was serious, and he's been charged with threats
Gotcha.
on other people.
Gotcha. So they charge him with assault?
I think he threatened to pour battery acid on some other government employees.
Yeah, criminal threat probably then, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what needs to be done, and like I said, with mentals, there's no guarantee on calming things down.
Thank you, Eva. We'll move on to the next question. Looks like Jennifer Durham.
Hi, I have a quick question about like when you're running into a situation with somebody that's difficult. I notice that people tend to have a habit of repeating themselves, so it kind of turns into this like unending cycle. Are there any tips for like how we can kind of break that? Like they tend to repeat the same thing even after, we're telling them like, well, this is our policy or whatnot.
So the person you're communicating with is repeating their problem. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, a lot of times in communication, when I talk to someone, when they're telling me a story, I will repeat it back and synopsize it, showing them that I have listened and I heard what what they have said. I do that back to them, and by doing that, a lot of times that will keep them from repeating the same thing again. And again, a little different scenario. I'm dealing with victims and suspects on most occasions, but the technique works on both. Some instances where people have a traumatic incident, on the law enforcement side of things, a lot of times they'll continue to repeat, and by me saying, that's a time where you might want to start to interrupt and say, yeah, you told me that, but tell me about all this other stuff, and kind of change that direction and get them back on point to what you're trying to achieve. Sometimes that helps.
Sometimes when
Okay,
they're just in that loop, like you said, because maybe they're emotionally upset too, and so sometimes they get stuck on that. Like you said, repeat that, so you are showing that you understand what they're saying. That's when you might encourage them to take a few breaths and then try to lead them into some options so that they can move past this spot that they're stuck in and see what we can do and move on from there.
In any kind of confrontation or escalated situation, some of the biggest things you can do is validate what they're saying and let them know that you understand how they're feeling. Not saying like you're trying to feel what they're feeling, but let them then know you hear them, you understand them, and you want to help them. And then we can divert to those options. Hey, I know this is the issue. Here's some options I have for you. What do you want to do? And then I always put it back on them and then help them make their own decision. And a lot of times that'll really bring or de-escalate the situation quite quickly by doing that. I've had a lot of victims that are frustrated with a neighbor, and there's no criminal issue. So when they call me and I knock on the door and they answer the door, I ask them, what's going on? This is what's happening. I'm like, great. Have you made contact with them? I start asking them what they have done, and then after that is over, then I'll ask them, what would you like me to do to help resolve this issue? And I have them guide me of what they're expecting, and then based on our policies and the law is where I'll start navigating through that, but it's putting a little more back on them and letting them make those decisions for themselves tends to help a lot as well.
The reason why we're telling you to give them options is it makes them feel like they have a little bit more control. So I'm sure you can identify anybody doesn't like to be out, have no control over anything. So that gives a little bit of control. And even if that's, let's say the person has to leave the building or whatever, well, you can either leave on your own, or we're going to have to do it this way, whether that's calling security or police or something like that. That's not great options, but that's still, they get to choose something. And so we're still giving them a little bit of control that makes them feel a little better and hopefully help calm them down a little bit too.
I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Next question from anyone. And I don't see anybody's hand up, but if there's anyone else who has any additional questions, please feel free to ask at this time.
Hey, Chris Labram, MABCD. Sorry, I didn't get my hand up, but
It's okay.
it sounds like a lot of us are dealing with similar things, so I definitely appreciate that. A few follow-ons there. So when you talk about someone entering a crisis and us needing to get help for that, can you talk to us a little bit about some of the identifiers, or how we can, how we could quickly, or at what point you know that that's what you're dealing with and you have to get help?
Are you talking mental health crisis?
Yes.
Okay. I like to think we're all normal in this meeting and contact right now, but what you need to be looking for is abnormalities. Now, some people have tics and odd cues that they do on their own, but something that we look for is, are they, based on what I'm seeing, what they're hearing in my communication with them, are they able to take care of themselves? And if they can't apologize, this mic's acting up. We always ask, can they take care of themselves? If somebody is living with them, they keeping an eye on this person. And if they're able to take care of themselves, they're a danger to themselves or someone else, usually it'll jump out at you. But those are the questions you need to be asking yourself when you're talking to these folks. If they're having issues, if you suspect they may not be feeding themselves, or this mic keeps acting up. If you think they're not feeding themselves and not bathing and issues like that, hygiene, there's a cumulative amount of problems you could see that may address that issue. That's when you need to be calling us anyways, because we're going to need to address that as well. Because if they're a danger to self or others, then we will get them help. In some cases, if they like it or not, but a lot of times we still offer them options to try to make it better for them. Let them make that decision.
I think also CommCare does offer some training as far as mental health that could help you guys maybe identify those issues and identify them before they become more of a problem. So that'd be a resource I would suggest reaching out to and looking for some training. I know they get busy, but maybe if they can provide something like this for you guys, where they do a seminar and you record it, that might be beneficial as well. We'll move on to the next question.
I'm sorry,
Nope.
Chris, still here, because I appreciate that. Good advice there. Another one is when we're talking mental health and some of the mentals, as you say, that we deal with, all of that stuff you're discussing is spot on, how you kind of get caught in that loop. So it is helpful to have some methods to try to kind of deal with that. But then another concern we have is sometimes it's hard to tell, or it's hard for us to tell the difference between maybe just day to day, for lack of a better term, mental health and under the influence of a substance. Can you talk to us a little bit about that as far as how to identify that, and then what options we have if we think we've got somebody with substance, or someone who's high?
Well, there's not really a lot of difference. Usually, most people with mental impairments are usually caused from drug or alcohol use for many years, from my experience, or some was a drug on board or another. Others born that way, obviously. that's extremely complex again, and enough time in the day to actually talk about that. But again, most mentals will, trying to get the right words here, will talk about things that are almost juvenile to some extent, or something that's non-existent. I don't know what this mic keeps doing. Or they'll talk about things that aren't there. They see and hear things. Where you're impaired people, obviously, they're going to have a lot more manipulation issues, standing issues, walking around. Speech is going to be more slurred, things of that nature. When you get into the drug users that are on stimulants, then you're going to see a lot of rapid movement, but I see a lot of rapid movement for some mentals as well. Fortunately, I've had the experience where I can go, I've dealt with hundreds, potentially thousands of people in my career that have been in those states, and I still sometimes can't tell you if it's a mental health issue or if it's a under the influence issue of some narcotic or alcohol. But on most occasions, they'll exhibit juvenile behavior or seeing and hearing things on the mental side, and then they will, under the influence side, that's where you're going to see motor skills lacking, speech slurred, rapid movements to slow movements. I think that is what'll differentiate them more than anything.
You're still going to use some of the same tactics of slowing down for either way, making sure you're giving them space and being more patient with them anyway, even when it is hard to tell the difference.
All right, thank you, sir.
Mr. Labram, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it did. I appreciate that. If nobody else has got something right off, I'll pile on with my last one, which a lot of this, and I think Kaylin mentioned this on Monday, that some of this initiated from a physical assault, not gross assault, but a push that one of our inspectors, a few pushes that he got. It sounds like others, again, have had either threats of that or similar. And a lot of my question, which it sounds like you stated, and I just want to kind of confirm or hear if you have anything more on it, is what I feel like we see is that consequences tend to de-escalate the situation, meaning that if someone does something like that and we press charges, we get the PD involved. If someone is getting to the point where we're doing our best to apply these communication tactics and they're getting violent or they're getting really loud, and we call an officer into the situation, or even a lot of times call one of the supervisors into the situation, that they will generally de-escalate pretty quickly. So we've tried to be careful with that, but again, that's a tactic that we employ, is to try to not let people get off the hook when they treat our employees really badly or make threats. But I really worry about the first time that doesn't work, or the first time that maybe that invokes a reaction and causes violence. So it seemed like what you all were saying is that normally pursuing charges, pursuing, again, an officer involvement when warranted, is the right way to go. So I know this is kind of weird, not really a question in there, but I guess the question would be if you have anything more to add to that, or if there's, some experience or something that you would like to add as to kind of where that line is that de-escalates, or that versus causing more problems, or versus, I guess what I'm saying is maybe I don't want to do something that would trigger a violent act.
Correct. I think I understand your question. So if you're getting somebody that's deciding that they're going to start making threats and try to intimidate you, you need to pick up on those cues. A lot of times they do that well before the actual act. So if you're going in to do an inspection and you've contacted them and they're being hostile, the last thing I want to do before, and I apologize, this mic is acting up. I don't know if it's because I'm outside of a connected area. But a lot of times, if you're picking up those cues before, we shouldn't be going in unless we know it's safe to do so. And a lot of times you can pick that up. For us, even as officers, if I'm dealing with somebody, they're hostile, and then they start calming down and talking to me normal, and I'll get a third person in, I'm not going to still go in that house by myself with that individual without a backup officer there, if that makes sense. So that's one way to mitigate that. The other is picking up those cues is huge right from the beginning, being aware of your surroundings. Sometimes we get honed in on doing our job rather than explaining what we're going to do. It's no different than when we see new officers telling somebody they're under arrest, and the suspect is asking why, and the officer's so worried about getting them in cuffs or not communicating with them. Tell them why, and a lot of times you'll end up quelling that issue quickly just because they know and they know what to expect. And I do a lot of minimizing is hey, this is what I've got to do, this is why I've got to do it, but I want to help you out. So what's your issues? So I can maybe pass this along so we can help resolve this issue for whatever you may be dealing with. So I think it's also important for the employee to know what they can do, what they have to do, and what they can do to potentially help on situations. What type of leeway do they have to help guide a person that's being hostile, help de-escalate and calm them down? If you know what you can and can't do and your limitations, as an employee, I think it always will help them to solve that issue so it doesn't get to that point. Again, we don't want to, if we're getting those cues and we think we need somebody, we need to call and not wait until it happens. Does that answer your question, or did I miss something?
I think you're kind of looking for, is this a little bit of confirmation? Are we doing the right thing of giving, if you stop, if you can please just take a few breaths and do this. If not, then we're going to have to call the police. That kind of goes into what we were talking about of giving them those options. And sometimes the option is either cooperate with us or we're going to call out the police. I know that a lot of times we have shown up on calls where everybody's calm now. It's because one of the parties said, well, I'm going to call the police now. And a lot of times that can be something that will calm people down. But like we mentioned at the very beginning, there's some people that, no matter what we do and tactics we use, you can't de-escalate everyone, and there are people out there, and hopefully if you recognize that, remember to back up and make sure that you guys are all safe when you do come in contact with those people.
I think what you're already doing with calling the supervisor is a good tool also, because a lot of times when the supervisor gets out there, they're away from the situation, they're already a little more calm. They can sometimes step in and help de-escalate that a little bit. With us, we even use that. We'll call a sergeant or a lieutenant out there. They come in, they see that supervisor, and they can a lot of times have a good rapport with them, and it works really well for us as well. So I think you already doing that is a good tool to use as well.
Mm-hmm.
Did that help, sir?
It did. Many thanks. Yeah, for working through my explanation there. So yeah, looks like we've got another hand. So I will quit with that.
Thanks, you.
Thanks you all for your time and your work in doing this.
Absolutely. We have one more question so far. Valerie Bruce.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, great. This is Valerie. I'm in housing. My question and kind of situation is this. Housing, it seems like our clients have 10 floors to continue to brew, and by the time they get to our reception desk, they are heated. So our receptionists really have very little time to react, because they just come in with, I'm being evicted and I'm upset. And my question is, our receptionists are sitting down. Does it help if they stand up and talk to that person, or does that make the situation worse?
That's a good question.
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is.
There's two thoughts that I have. One, if I sit down, you become an easy target, and they might take advantage of you sitting there. The second thing in my head's telling me that if somebody's charging at me and they're very aggressive, I'd rather be on my feet And I would probably start speaking in a stronger tone of voice, letting them know that they might not want to continue to come towards me. And even small females have done this on the street, and it's been effective. Sometimes we have to raise our voice loud enough to get over the person that's angry. But as soon as you get their attention, you start talking quieter and quieter and quieter, and a lot of times that will bring them down. Again, nothing works all the time, and it depends on the person I'm dealing with. But if somebody's coming at you aggressively, I think standing up and addressing them why they're coming before they get there, letting them know what your concern is, and being straightforward with them right off the bat will a lot of times slow them down, make them go, hey, I'm probably making a bad decision. And then going from there. Again, you guys are asking a lot of great questions. I wish we had videos and we could see what people do, and because a lot of things that we can pick up and that will help save us during a confrontation is just paying attention to people. 90% of our communication is done physically, the rest is verbal. And you can tell when people are upset just by looking at them. I've had days where I've walked into our office and my coworkers are like, are you doing all right, Chris? It's because they can read, you read that before you actually get any verbal. So being able to do that, and obviously do it at a distance, giving ourselves time and space to identify that issue.
If I could add to that also, I think that the person standing is asserting their dominance over that person sitting. And I think if you stand up, you take some of that power away from that person that's trying to intimidate. So my thought would be standing is probably a really good option. And if we can have the receptionist standing maybe before the subject even comes in, that might be even better.
Well, they come into our front door and the receptionist is sitting. And so she starts out, he or she, whoever's covering that area, starts out probably at a disadvantage because that person is upset from probably trying to call their leasing specialist, maybe not getting a phone call back. So the receptionist, she gets the brunt of it as she's trying to call that person's particular leasing specialist. And so I think you're right. Standing at one point, I think would be a great idea, just to say, and maybe some hand gestures of, okay, hold on. I think I understand what's going on. Let me get somebody. And I think then they can say, let me go get them, and then leave the area, and then that keeps them safe.
Yep.
I like what you're talking about, Valerie, because in our last module we talked about body language and reading body language, but not only reading theirs, they're doing the same thing with us. So the standing, but also what are we giving to try and show that we're listening? And, I'm sure that your receptionist has to deal with a lot of venting, like we were talking about earlier. But if you are closed off, they're only going to be more upset by that. So if you can, in some way in your body language, like you said, show that you're listening and trying to be empathetic for them, I think maybe it would help too.
Well, I'll definitely pass that on to our receptionists because they get it all. And then sometimes if we hear someone's voice, a client's voice is louder, we start, the guys walk through the lobby area, or we'll start trying to call and kind of see what's going on, because then it does seem to diffuse the situation when other people come in and say, hey, I'll be glad to go try to find that person for you, or something like that. So,
yeah, what do they?
Those are some great answers.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but what is your typical issue that people get upset about?
A lot of times they're being evicted, or they have not heard from their leasing specialist. They have caseloads of about 750 families. And so a phone call, we promise a phone call in about 48 hours. But on the 49th hour, if they haven't gotten a phone call,
right,
they come up. A lot of times, and so when it gets to us, when they have to show up, they're about to be evicted, they're lost their job, or there's always more than just that issue. So they're coming at us sack full of issues. But that's the main issue is they're not getting anywhere making a phone call to the leasing specialist. They want to talk to somebody, and they're not going to leave until they talk to somebody.
Understood.
So they've dug their heels in, and especially with COVID, they're really digging their heels in. I think the receptionist being downstairs is a lot better, but they're digging their heels in, and they're not going to leave until they talk to the person that can change their situation.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty tough. So when you guys do have people that do that, do you get a hold of their person that's dealing with them, and they'll call and talk to them just to solve the problem? Or do they just get tired of waiting and ultimately walk away?
Usually, well, that receptionist, there are two in the area. One will either get up and go find that housing specialist and say, "Hey, your client out here," and they're not happy. And that person goes out and takes them to an interview room and talks with them about what's going on with them. Now, if we detect alcohol or they're acting like they're high, they are instructed to call security, because we realize we're not going to be able to communicate effectively
Right.
when those two things are into play. Mental health issues, if we again try to just say, let's get your leasing specialist, because they have a file on this person, and they dealt with them more than the receptionist has. So we try a number of ways to handle the need, but a lot of times it is, no, you're evicted, and there's some resources. And that's never a good feeling for the person that has to say it, or the person that is getting that news reaffirmed, because they've received something in the mail, or how that eviction process goes.
All right. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Valerie. Do we have any other questions? We still have some time if anybody has anything else. I'll give it just a minute or two, and then I'll provide you guys, if anybody had any questions, or anybody watching this post this live feed, they can email me a question if they have something more specific. I'll give you my email address again if you want to write it down. It's epiotrowski@wichita.gov. You can send that to me via email, and we'll try to get your question answered as best we can. Okay. If we don't have any more questions, we'll go ahead and conclude this. I hope everyone got some good out of it, and we had some really good questions. So thank you all for your time.
All right, thank you all for presenting today.
Thank you all.
For those of you that you know this is not a cure-all, this one training session didn't answer all your questions. So as supervisors, leaders of managers of your different departments, make sure you're looking at other avenues, whether it's through the Mental Health Association, ComCare, places like that, to provide training annually for your personnel and to enhance their knowledge. Once again, this presentation was recorded, so it will be available, just as the situational awareness one will also be available here on the city site here shortly for city employees to view. Thank you for your time.